Je kunt de camera bijdraaien als het niet helemaal goed in beeld zit.
Is it on already? Or?
Yeah.
So, that's it.
Before a glass of wine, but I do it after.
It's all being recorded.
I'll behave.
Okay. Tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening. Goedenavond. Nau mai haere mai ki te nehui o te DBA. I te newi ki hoki ka whakanui mātou I te rā whānau o te kingi o ngā whenua taputu. Kia ora. During Dutch Week, we celebrate the birthday of His Majesty the King, Willem-Alexander of the Netherlands, who turned 59 on Monday. So on this occasion, I have a very special call to action to celebrate the King. Please join me when I say, Lang leve de koning. Hoera! A very warm welcome to all of you here in Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland. It's great to see such a strong turnout, and a very special welcome to those joining us for the very first time. My name is Martijn Bakker, and I am the acting president of the DBA. I would like to warmly acknowledge the presence of our ambassador, Art van der Horst. Ambassador, it's great to have you here with us tonight, and we'll invite you to say a few words after the presentations. Before we get started, just a quick health and safety briefing. It's very quick. In case of an emergency, please make your way down to the stairs to the car park. There's an assembly point down there. Please follow the instructions of the venue staff. And the toilets are also located just alongside the stairway that you used to get into this room on the right-hand side. So far, it's been a very special year for the DBA. Not only have we seen strong corporate support, but in February, we have also signed a memorandum of understanding with the Netherlands Embassy to further strengthen the cooperation. We've expanded our activities beyond Auckland. Last year, we had our first event in Christchurch. And just 2 days ago, we kicked off Dutch Week in Wellington with our very first DBA event in Wellington, together with Wellington Airport. We are now also streaming, so this is live on YouTube, and recording our sessions to reach a wider national audience. And our upcoming AGM will also be held online for the very first time to increase our national reach. Tonight's event focuses on a topic that is both highly relevant to New Zealand and deeply rooted in Dutch expertise: water management, resilience, and climate solutions. We're very pleased to have Haskoning New Zealand with us this evening, and they will share their insights from their work here in New Zealand, as well as in the wider Pacific region, a region where resilience and climate management is becoming increasingly critical. We have 2 speakers joining us tonight. We advertised with Sian John, but unfortunately she sends her apologies. She was called out to an urgent mission in Tonga. And we're pleased to have Nora Jukic, who will speak about Haskoning's work in the Pacific, and Guus Rongen, who will speak about the activities of Haskoning here in New Zealand. Thank you. Dank jullie wel and enjoy.
Yeah. Thank you for the introduction, Martijn, and thank you for the opportunity to tell us about who we are in New Zealand and what we do. So, because it's a Dutch audience, we thought we'd start with the name Haskoning. Where does it come from? Well, Haskoning was founded by Johan van Hasselt and later joined by Jacobus de Koning. So they combined the Has and the Koning, making Haskoning. Later, they also became royal, so it became Royal Haskoning, and they joined with DHV, so Royal Haskoning DHV, which might sound familiar. But last year, they shortened the name again to Haskoning, which is less of a tongue twister. So what is Haskoning? It's a big multinational engineering company, founded in 1881. It's more than 7,000 staff worldwide, of which 1,200 in Asia Pacific, which we're part of as New Zealand, all the way in the corner. And in New Zealand, we have 10 or 9 people at the moment, or soon we'll have another person joining us. Oh, look, it's going. So we have Sean John, who's the director. She unfortunately couldn't make it today, but she leads us. And then we have water management and technology, Mark and Mickey, who are in the back. Environmental and social safeguard, Nora, Niraj, and Vicky. Then we have in the kind of the water engineering group, Raymond, Ellie, and myself. And then Amy will join us soon as a coastal engineer. I'm not sure why it does this, but okay. So what I'll do is explain what Haskoning does in New Zealand, and it's mainly the water engineering work. So it's coastal, river, and water resource engineering. And what I'll do is I've picked a few projects which our team has worked on over the past years, kind of all over New Zealand, and try to cover the different aspects of water engineering. Starting all the way in the south at the Waitaki River. So the Waitaki River is a braided river. It drains the Lake Tekapo, Pukaki, and then goes all the way to the coast. And and along the river, you got a lot of irrigation scheme because it provides a lot of water for this otherwise dry area. And one of those irrigation scheme is the Morven Glenovie irrigation scheme. And the water intake is right there. You can see it. It's indicated by the red dashed line, and then the main river is the solid red line. So what's happening with this river? Over the past year, it has been kind of moving as braided rivers do. So braided rivers are kind of typical New Zealand because you have these mountains which have a lot of sediment, so stones basically coming down, and the rivers are quite steep, so you get this braid plane pattern that you see in the image. But it also means that it's highly active, so it will kind of change every year, and if you have bad luck, you can kind of see that river will kind of in a flood move into your irrigation channel, like deposit a lot of sediment, and you have a big problem as an irrigation scheme. So what they did, so you can see here that they did some measures to kind of try to alleviate that. But in the end, you can't fight nature here. You can't really win. So what they did is they asked Raymond Strong, who is our technical director of river engineering, to come up with a different alignment to kind of make it work. And coming from the Netherlands, we also have rivers, and we're quite good. We always praise ourselves in how well we are able to manage our rivers. So in the Netherlands, you would do something like this, right? You would create a few of those groins, and that forces the river to stay in the main channel. But in New Zealand, that's not an option. The river is too morphologically active. It would basically wash away those groins, and you'd end up in the same situation. So you kind of have to work with the river and kind of try the solution that works in the short term, and revise it in the medium long term. Another projects, or a few projects we've done, are for Christchurch, in particular related to storm surge. So this is Christchurch, a nice photo of it. And Christchurch was built in a wetland or a swamp or whatever you want to call it. These days we call it wetlands, which means it's close to groundwater, close to the sea level, and therefore prone to flooding. But luckily for Christchurch, coastal flooding is quite a minor hazard because storm surges are relatively minor. So if you if you're from the Netherlands and you know the North Sea and the 1953 storm surge, which was like a couple meters above the highest tide, that's never going to happen here because just the ocean doesn't allow for that amount of storm surge. So you're getting maximum like half meter or a meter, which is really good for all the people living in Christchurch and living along the waterfront because you can live close to the water and you're kind of safe from hazards. However, the climate is changing and sea level is rising. So over the next, let's say 100 years, you can expect maybe up to a meter of sea level rise, depending on the projection you follow. And that will be a big problem for all these people because now, your whole tidal range is coming into your house. So they'll need to do something. And in 2015, GHD, a different engineering company, asked Haskoning, because of their experience from the Netherlands with storm surge barrier, to look at a few options for closing of this estuary with a storm surge barrier. So I think they looked at a few options they used in the Netherlands and it's like, hey, can we use that there? They came up with a concept design. I don't think it was very popular. Doesn't really fit the landscape. I think so. The council was kind of against it, but recently the mayor has is kind of brought up the idea again and it's revisiting it. So who knows? Then the third project I want to talk about is Hawke's Bay. As you probably all know, in 2023, there were two major flood events in New Zealand or in the North Island. We had Auckland Anniversary Day event, which you might have experienced, and Hawke's Bay, Cyclone Gabrielle, which was, I guess, more devastating even. The cyclone was in Auckland as well, but compared to the Auckland Anniversary Day, it was less. Yeah, true. That's okay. Good point. Yeah, West Coast was. You can kind of see it here, right? So this is the pattern. So an extratropical cyclone is a cyclone that moves from the tropics and it acts like a normal big storm event, and it brings moisture from the sea and it pours it out over the mountains because the air is rising, and then you get the colored areas, which are heavy precipitation. So what we did here is some hydrological investigations, mainly determine how extreme these events were. And Raymond Strong, our river engineer, he did a property risk categorization, which means determining if people can keep living in the area after it has been flooded. So I'll focus on Hawke's Bay. In the top left figure, this is the Esk Valley. So it was one of the valleys that was kind of hit the hardest. In the top left bay, you can see the valley after the flood. So all the brown stuff, it's all deposited sediment. So there's a major, there's not only water coming down, but there's also massive amounts of sediments, sand, silts coming down. You can see that on the top right figure at the house. So that fan is probably 2 meters high. The sediment goes up to the roof of that fan. So imagine, the depositions and the extremity of the events. You might wonder, where does it all come from? That you can kind of see in the lower left corner. This is an aerial photograph after the event. You can see all these brown patches, which are landslides in the hills. So that's where the sediment comes from, and it comes into the river, and it creates problems in the valley. And then it's not just the water and the sediment. It's also the coast. So during a big storm or a cyclone, you get big waves, and they have these gravel beaches, so the waves tend to close the river mouths. So you're kind of creating a dam, river floods, you flood the whole area until it breaks through. So like an additional layer of devastation there, I guess. I think this kind of, so ideally you wouldn't want to do the property risk categorization afterwards, right? You want to do it prior. You want to know beforehand who's at risk of flooding. But that's just it's just a problem in flood risk. You never know until you know, right? What can happen? You often derive your statistics based on past events, but you have to project them into the future. And I think that's particularly in New Zealand very important or a big issue with climate change, because you have these low density areas and this active hydrological regime. Okay, so last water project. This is Thames, and what we're doing for Thames is what Haskoning started to do for Thames. So Thames is a town, you probably all know it, in Coromandel, and it's next to the Firth of Thames, which is a bay which is susceptible to storm surges, the Karanga River in the north, and then the local catchments from the Coromandel. So it's prone to flooding from different sources, and Haskoning was tasked with coming up with concept design for flood defenses. But they quickly realized that if you build a stop bank or lift the stop banks, you're creating a bathtub, so you're creating problems, because if your river floods, you're kind of keeping the water instead of draining it. So the project turned into a flood risk study, which we typically do, and that means we create a model of the area, we try to reproduce these events, and then we come up with mitigation options to help and alleviate it. And that's the last project, so now I'll give the floor to Nora, who's going to tell you all about what we do in the Pacific.
All right, I wonder why it keeps
Yeah,
jumping.
I'm not sure why it does, so you just have to go back
Now you
afterwards.
see all the secrets before I tell them to you.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so nice to meet you. My name is Nora. I'm a climate change adaptation expert and disaster risk management expert. And you will hear when I'm talking about our work in the Pacific, I'll talk about climate change. But because of my expertise, I call myself a bridge between the engineers and the communities. I'm usually the one who's talking about these issues from the community perspective and make sure that the engineering assessments that are carried out are kind of translated in a way that they can actually make an impact at the community level. So a lot of the work and how I'm speaking about it, these are all projects that I'm heavily involved in. I'm talking more from the social perspective, so less of the engineering side. It's not that we don't do it, it's just because I'm talking more about my experience. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to take you to a journey across the Pacific. I'm going to take you first to Micronesia, then Polynesia, and then to Melanesia. So we work across the whole Pacific region, and we do all sorts of things in terms of climate resilience. And one of the biggest projects we are working on at the moment is in Micronesia. And what we're doing is we're developing the national adaptation plan for the whole country. So what happens in Micronesia, just as a context, assuming that you may not know all the details about these island nations as well as we who work there all the time do, it's 4 states, and all of those states operate almost as their own country. So they have very different kind of people, different kind of geography, different kind of challenges when it comes to climate change adaptation. So when we're putting together a national development plan, we need to actually do these state-based action plans as well. So it is quite complicated, politically speaking. What are the national priorities when you have so much diversity at the state level? So what we did actually early in this year, we visited all of those states. We did workshops. We discussed about what are the adaptation priorities to you here at your state. And we visited outer islands as well, quite interesting missions to very small communities. And that's where you see some of the photography. And in addition to doing the national adaptation plan, we developing this whole set of different instruments, as I like to call them, which is financing strategy, communications and capacity building strategy, different kind of elements that helps translating this policy and this more guidance note type of work into something that can be actually actionable and implemented in reality. And as part of that work, what we've done is carried out a few awareness campaigns. We interview people, we photograph people, and then we put the stories out there so that people can tell their stories and their experience with climate change in their own world. So this would be more of a policy level way we're working with climate change in the Pacific. And more on the social environmental safeguarding side, which is a big thing that's jumping. No, we're not. So what we're doing in many of the countries at the moment, we're doing a lot of environmental and social safeguarding work. And what that means is that when there's big infrastructure development happening and there's donor funding that is being used to fund that infrastructure development, there's quite strict conditions in terms of the social environmental impacts. Since we need to understand what we're doing is minimizing the negative social and environmental impact. So that's why we're doing all sorts of impact assessments, and that's what our team does. So what's happening in Tuvalu, which I would say is arguably probably one of the most famous climate change adaptation projects in the Pacific region. They are reclaiming land from the sea to raise land, and that's actually, I understood you do that in the Netherlands. So maybe, I don't know how well you're aware of how you do that in the Netherlands, but in Tuvalu, it's quite necessary and need is urgent to reclaim land, which is higher than the current land in terms of climate change and sea level rises. So there's quite major infrastructure and engineering work going on at the moment. And what we've been doing is the environmental and social management around that. We've been doing consultations with the communities. I spent about a week there last year carrying out community consultations with the government officials, and we have a local team who keeps going these cycles of consultations to make sure that these people who have a coastline in front of their house and that's suddenly taken away, and there's going to be this big engineering structure which feels very foreign to them, you can imagine how that impacts a person or a community whose whole life is bound to the connection to the land and the sea. So it is quite complicated how to do that well, and we're trying our best. And I think every project people are doing this, we're learning more. So it is very, very interesting work. What we're doing in Niue is kind of a combination of climate change adaptation and hazard assessments. The project name is Multi-Hazard Risk Assessment for Niue's Transport Network. So this shows like climate change, it goes across all the sectors. It's not a sector on its own, to be fair. It is cross-sectoral. So in this case, the funding was targeted towards transport network. So what we did was a set of economical and engineering assessments on the key assets, which is the wharf, the airport, and the roads. It's quite a small island, which is quite high from the sea. And we did this kind of vulnerability assessments based on the hazard data that there is. And we understood quite quickly that if you only think about assets and the hazards and you kind of simplify this kind of assessment, it would say that everything is okay, we don't need to worry about it. But if you take on board the human impact of it, and I like to always say, who cares about the road if it doesn't lead to the people? So that's what I just a few weeks ago came back from Niue carrying out social vulnerability assessment. So I did a set of consultations across the villages, the 40 villages on the island, and carried out surveying and different kind of participatory exercises to get their feedback on what do they think that is challenging for them and what are their experiences. And one thing that you hear a lot across the whole region is a concept called consultation fatigue. They're sick of seeing people like me coming and just asking questions because they see consultants coming, nothing happens, and they spend their time. And I'm very aware of that. And basically, that's also my whole job. So you can imagine when I'm in this kind of event in the village halls, how much I get questions and challenging. So as a response to that, what we end up doing as part of this project was a multimedia knowledge product development, as fancy as it sounds. But we basically shot a mini documentary. We interview people so they can tell their story in their own words instead of just reading another report. And then we did some portrait photography, and I wrote some case study stories that we can use part of the reporting so it becomes more digestible and accessible to different kind of stakeholders. So that's what we did or are currently in the middle of doing in Niue as well. And then kind of quite different project is in Solomon Islands, which is, I finished this late last year. Here is, I even need to read the title, Grid Reliability and Integration Study and Development of Power Development Plan for the Honiara Power Grid. So I'm not an energy engineer by any means. What we did in this project is that we partnered with the engineering company who was actually doing this grid assessment. So there's a goal in Honiara, which is the capital of the Solomon Islands, to move to 100% renewable energy by 2030. And that's an ambitious goal. And what they need to understand is like, can the grid handle it? If there is the infrastructure in place, they wanted to do a disaster and climate resilience assessment on the current assets. So that's something I carried out. What they also wanted to know, the main agency who's driving this work in Honiara, which is Solomon Power, do they have the resources, the capacity, the skills to carry out this kind of work? So I did a capacity needs assessment, and based on that, I created a training framework and a development plan, where to go, who could provide this kind of training. So yeah, that was done over a couple of trips to Honiara, and yeah, with World Bank, and I think it ended up being quite a successful piece of work. But as mentioned, our sectors here in New Zealand, this is now what you see on the screen. This is all the sectors Haskoning globally covers, which is a lot. In New Zealand, we mainly work around climate resilience, water technology, clearly energy, as you saw, So our sectors would be climate resilience adaptation, loss and damage, port and maritime, and river, coastal, and water engineering. Got it? So those would be the sectors we cover. But the services we cover, the environmental safeguarding, the social safeguarding, the vulnerability assessments, the water technology, these different kind of technical assessments that we're carrying out, those go beyond just the sectors I presented. So that's why if we are tapping on these different sectors that are not currently in our portfolio, that's when we collaborate. The Solomon Island project was a perfect example of that. So I think that's kind of where this is heading, the invitation for conversation. We have skill sets, quite wide range, as you've learned today. And we are in New Zealand young, but very ambitious, and we're looking for different places to work and different places to enhance the society together, which is the plan. And mainly we work in the Pacific region and in New Zealand, but we are very interested in hearing what you guys do. And if you have any questions or any comments or any suggestions what we could do together, let's chat about it today.
Got a question there. So I saw
Cool.
on your website your mobility.
Yeah.
I thought it was actually quite interesting. A lot of urban planning involved in that.
Yeah.
It definitely is something that New Zealand has shorted up
Yeah.
quite a bit. So why are you not focusing on that? I've been on Niue.
Yeah.
I've used the motorbike there. There's 1,600 people living
Yeah.
there. I don't think you need to do a transport network consultancy there. I
I
think you
agree.
should spend time on urban planning here in New Zealand.
Yeah.
The smartest living there.
Well, I quite enjoyed my time there. But so, okay, let's just go
I did as
one
well.
step backwards.
Different topic altogether.
Let's go one step backwards. Why we do any of these projects? None of these are our ideas. We're not going to these countries and saying this is what we want to do for you. There's a donor agency. As you saw, I was talking about Asian Development Bank, World Bank, UNDP, and SPREP, which is a regional agency working with Green Climate Fund money in this specific project. They come up with an idea based on their conversations with these governments that this is what we need to do. Then they put out a tender. We need some experts who can help us to build that. So when we come on board, that conversation has already happened. And then we come up with the best possible way to do that. Sometimes like the Niue one, as I was saying, the social vulnerability assessment wasn't, for example, at the beginning, a big part of the project. So we kind of changed it. We said, you need this. We think this is actually going to bring you results, since we figured as well that the roads are actually quite okay, especially after the quite recent Chinese development in there. So yeah, a good question. Are all the projects always the top priority? I wouldn't say. I always agree that when I go to a country, that the project that all the money is put in is the top priority for the country, but that's out of my hands. Someone else had that conversation, and we are trying to fill in the technical need as much as we can. Other comments? Keep grilling. It's like the village meeting.
Question.
Yeah.
You were talking about the Micronesia
Yeah.
4 states, and that they had 4 different kinds of problems. And I was intrigued actually, because I think they'd be about the same.
Yeah. I think geographically they are, for example, so there's Chuuk, Yap, Kostrai, and Ponape. Kostrai, for example, is quite high, one island. Yap has hundreds of little islands and different languages. In Chuuk, how would I put this? They're quite far behind of the other states in terms of technical capacity in some areas, the infrastructure development. So there's different levels of development. There's just different geography, and there's different culture. You know, we have colleagues in each of these states. If they spoke their local language, they wouldn't understand each other. I think Ponape and Chuuk could partly, but yeah, that's how different it is. So it is how I was described it. It's almost a bit artificial how it all was pulled together. And there's creates a lot of challenges when they're trying to implement any kind of work or make decisions. So when it comes to putting together a national adaptation plan, we're talking about priorities in each of the states. And to an extent, I do say they are similar priorities, but they are specific priorities as well. And they want to be seen as individuals. I think they want to be heard as their own state because that's part of their identity. I think that's a big part of it as well.
Thank you.
So both of you spoke a little bit about the problems that you're looking at. I was interested in what kind of solutions do you eventually propose to those sort of problems? So just one would be okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Do you want to talk about your solutions?
Yeah, no, it obviously depends. It obviously depends on the
Yeah.
on the problem, but if it's um, if it's flood risk, you then it depends on like the water.
But you gave five examples of problems, right?
Yeah.
So one of those.
Yeah. So for example, Thames, the
Yeah.
easy problem, increase the pumps, right? So if you have more pumps, quite of a Dutch solution, I guess, but you get less flooding. Sorry,
Pump it
to the ocean.
what's coming in from
No, so you make sure that the water can't come in, right? So you add a flap gate to your pipe or something.
like
Exactly, just like the Dutch do work to have polders, right? If it's about river engineering, if you want to reduce, like the Dutch have the ruimte voor de rivier. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but exactly. Well, that's often, it basically means giving the river more space back, right? So if you talk about the braided river that we saw on the first project, they used to span like a large braid plane, and then farmers come and they say like, I want to use this land, so they build a stop bank, and you never go back, right? So you only constrain the river further and further, and at some point the river is gonna break out again. So you either have to build up or give it more space. But I guess the principles depend on what kind of hydrological situation you're looking at, but often they're quite similar in that sense. Give more space to the water, or in some way, or try to keep it out.
So, like here in New Zealand, like what we have in the Netherlands with what's called Uitwaarden.
Yeah.
When the river is too high, then the water goes into the Uitwaarden.
Yeah.
You don't have that here, right?
No. True. And I think for some rivers it could work. For example, like the larger rivers that have very low gradients, so you can actually create some space. But I think New Zealand rivers are typically very flashy. They say they respond very quickly. Within a few hours, you'll have a flood after the rain. So Uiterwaarden mainly work if you want to like remove lower the water level, so then upstream and downstream you'll have. So if you have a little bit of space, like in the Netherlands, between your water level and the top of your stop bank, it works. If you have a steep river, it works less well.
My solutions. Well, let's just start with the Tuvalu one. The whole point of our assessment was to come up to hear as many complaints as possible. So that is kind of a twisted way of going about it, because we wanted to hear from the people what they think is the problem. Then what we did was deliver those complaints to the engineer who designed the site. How does the reclamation site look like? The solutions they, for example, used is that they put in boat ramps at both ends, so the people have access to the sea. For example, during the construction, there's some challenges. Kids, there are two other sites beforehand that we weren't involved, that some kids used to play there when the construction is going. One of our solutions were like, should we have actually guided excursions from the school there, so the kids can come in a managed way to have a look instead of them, sneaking in. So, but this one was a kind of a twisted way, in a way that the whole point was to hear as much complaints so we can make as good job as we can with the engineering design. In terms of Micronesia, if the problem is climate change, one of the answers is the NAP itself that we are developing, coming up with national priorities, in what order, in what time frame we should be doing and what. And we've been really focused on coming up with solutions based on what the people have been saying. And all the other instruments, as I call them, is then supporting how to implement those. When it comes to, let's just skip them. You don't need to hear me talking that long. Same thing with the Solomon Islands. The capacity needs assessment was again a lot of complaining all the gaps that there are, because it was focusing on understanding what are the best solutions. Then the training framework and the training program was a response to that. The engineers, they actually came up with a plan, what parts of the grids need to be upgraded and in what kind of order. So it's a journey. but it comes with fully understanding first the issue, and then you can tailor the problem. But I do acknowledge that we probably focused on more talking about the problems than the solutions. So great question.
So what happens when you go away? So you finish the project.
I love that question too. I think I put it in this one because we work with Solomon Power, for example, in Honiara. So there was a local colleague from the Solomon Power agency company, I think it's even a company, who was sitting through all the assessments with me. So they understood that's actually up to them how they're going to implement this. Sometimes, in full honesty, nothing happens. Other times, if you frame it as I really tried, make it in a way that you can actually access further funding with these documents, then they will take them and pick them up and run with them. But my motto a little bit is that you can't help people more than they want to help themselves. So I can do all this if there's no motivation to, take the elements on board that we proposed. That's kind of where it ends. But how we're managing is that we have local consultants that we're working with, and we're having that ongoing relationship, and they're having a chance to contribute to the process consistently. But there definitely is fatigue of that as well. And some projects, there's not enough motivation after when we leave for them to go. Often it's also the funding. The funding goes. So they might have great ideas, but there's no long-term funding. There might be funding for 6 months consultancy, but not a long-term funding for a position who would take care of the training framework implementation. So then it becomes quite political. And yeah, the donors are trying these days having a bit smoother handover with the bigger engineering projects. So there's all sorts of processes in place. But yeah, sometimes it's a dead end, and we're learning more and more every project, like all of us, how to make it work. And yeah.
So that's the community side. What about the donors? How do you manage that?
What do you want to hear about that?
You did loads of input work, done this, we spent all this money, or you've spent all this money.
Yeah.
Have you got the outcomes you're looking for, and what do you recommend now, or was this worth a waste of time, or
Yeah.
what's the kind of feedback to them? So they're paying.
So how we run this work, there's quite strict terms of reference. So there's certain outputs and quite a lot of reports and different kind of deliverables that they want us to submit before they pay us. So they will not share a penny before they get what they want. I can tell you that. It can be quite hard to manage the expectations sometimes. For example, Niue was a perfect example of that. I think there was I think there was a misunderstanding a little bit in terms of the multi-hazard risk assessment, how severe the impact would be. I think there was an assumption that it would show a bit more dramatic results in terms of the available data. But our results weren't really showing that because it's a rock of Polynesia. It's actually quite high rising. So it wasn't showing a huge variety in terms of coastal inundation or flooding. And I think that went a little bit against the assumption that the donor had and how the terms of reference had been developed. So this was a perfect example that we needed to manage the expectations, like what were the results and what was the initial plan. And we needed to modify a little bit how we get there. How can we actually form the understanding? Since we understood there are issues, it might not be the coastal inundation, but in terms of social vulnerability, there is an impact. So it is a journey. They're quite strict, getting what they want. Sometimes there is a problem that certain solutions and ideas were too predetermined instead of letting the data speak. But I think donors are also getting better at that. And there's differences between who you work with as well.
What do you think?
Was I diplomatic enough?
Yeah.
If you would leave tomorrow and start somewhere else at the world, in the world for the same job on technical engineering and on the social aspect, what do you take with you here? What you think this is the best thing I have learned here, which I can use everywhere over the world. This is so specific and so awesome about New Zealand and about the Pacific in this kind of work. What are you going to take with you in your brain, suitcase at heart?
Yeah.
If you start tomorrow in Nicaragua or in Peru, whatever.
Good question. I have an answer. Do you want to start, or do you want?
You have an answer?
I have an
Oh,
answer.
you go first.
Okay. the importance of the community and the traditional local knowledge. In the Pacific, that has quite a strong role, because of the logistics and because of how communities work and how much smaller things are and how much more voices you end up hearing when you work in a place like Niue. You actually get to go around quite a bit. I'm not claiming I heard everyone, but I'm claiming I heard a lot of voices. And the understanding how important the local and traditional parts of it are. Like, for example, in here we were talking about roads, wharf and the airport. But actually what came up in my assessment was that the sea tracks and the bush tracks and the access to the bush, if the wharf doesn't come, we need our plantations in inland. We need to get to the water. So in the Pacific Islands, there's the connection to their tradition and how people used to do things is still strong. And I think a lot of parts of the world, that disconnect is getting bigger and bigger. And I'm actually doing research in that part as well as some academic research. I'm hugely passionate about how that works in the Pacific Island, how it doesn't work in the Pacific Islands. And I think that's a lesson that the whole world could take from this region.
Oh, my answer is right. So I think to answer your question, what did I have to learn to moving from the Netherlands to New Zealand, right? Because I was a hydraulic engineer in the Netherlands for 6.5 years. Then I moved to New Zealand, and I think the Netherlands are very good at managing water and in a very well-defined framework, let's say. And here, I think everything that kind of makes New Zealand pretty is also what makes it hydrologically challenging. Like everything can be is different, and there's like the example of the Hawke's Bay flooding. That's there's so many aspects that you didn't think about, and so you kind of have to take a step back and analyze the whole situation, and then try to determine what's important, and then maybe do all your detailed stuff, right? So that's what I would definitely take away if I would take with me.
That's interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
Did you ever come across the difficulty of interviewing women instead of males? Is there a difference in how they respond to problems?
Totally. Yeah. If we have the time and things are organized as they should be, we have often targeted conversation with women and youth. In Micronesia, we managed to do that quite well. How it happened was that we had a workshop, and we actually just had a different kind of focus group conversations within the workshop among the women and the men. But it depends on how much you're given time to go to these places. If you're given a week and you go to a big place and you try to do everything, you end up doing nothing. So sometimes you need to be quite selective. And one thing I learned in Micronesia was that those one-on-one interviews, when I did the case studies, and they were way more informative than the workshop with 60 people, when you actually did 14 in-depth interviews with individuals. So that's when I, for example, get a lot of insights from women. And the 6-7 women I interviewed then, they were really similar what they were saying, even though they were different islands. So yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, it happens. It also is a difference. The language is a challenge often. Sometimes you need a translator. Sometimes it's just better let the local expert do that and don't even try it to be translated. Sometimes that's not an option. So there's definitely a lot of filtering elements. So you need to try to work around those, since you can only work with the tools you have and the time and the budget you were given, which narrows it all down. So in ideal world, you would do always so much more consultation. But as said, then there's this whole other side of it, fatigue of the consultation and it's actually not a tiredness of being consulted. I think it's a tiredness of not seeing the results. So yeah, you need to be quite balanced in between who you talk and when, what kind of expectations you're raising. If you're talking about transport network and you're asking questions, you don't want to set the idea that they're going to get a new road next year. That might not happen. So you need to be really, and that's a skill that I would like to say I have, and that's why I have a job. But every situation is different.
Well, I think there are questions. I would just like to finish off a little bit, and we'll close this. So there's no need. My name is Art van der Vorst. I'm a Dutch ambassador, outgoing ambassador, now 4 years being here in this beautiful country, but also in the Pacific. So I'm also the Dutch ambassador to Fiji, Kiribati, Tuvalu, Cook Islands, Samoa, Tonga, cover French Polynesia, New Caledonia. So I have the most pictures of like you have, traveling around. And you're so right when you talk about water and where we make the difference and also the involvement. That's what we do. The Dutch are really known about water management. And I think what we have learned also over time is not to fight against water, because water is not coming from the sea only, it's coming from everywhere. It's to live with water. And I know already from my time in the US that we invested a lot in the social part of dealing with water and living with water. So, for instance, in the US, you have like the Dutch dialogues was sort of introduced. Really, so, hello. Keeping the people that matter really in the lead, and I think that's really important. And what you said as well, Nora, when we go to travel into the Pacific, it's so important to sit and to listen and also let them in the lead and not only, sort of complain afterwards, but having them involved from the beginning. And there's also so much that we can learn from them. And I think one of the things that we actually also learned over time is that it's not, the Dutch are always proud of what we are. I'm definitely very proud and have an orange heart. But also, I have nothing to trade. I have nothing to sell, but I have only to offer collaboration, because I think that makes the Dutch really strong on a lot. And I saw a lot of your projects already are always in collaboration. The Dutch have quite a lot of funds available through the Asian Development Bank, because we don't think that we are bilaterally sort of in the lead. We leave it to those that want to work together and do the best job that is fit for the people they have to serve. We are traveling on Monday to Fiji together also with Haskoning. Martin, are you ready? Have you packed already? And also for other Dutch companies, just because I built relations in the Pacific as well. We call it Whakamanangatanga in Maori, that's relationship building. And I also hope that the companies can use those relations also to get a better acquaint already what they do, but also sort of also learn from each other, because I think collaboration also with other Dutch companies and other industries are quite relevant for people that are really in need in the Pacific. So thank you for that, what you do, both, Guus, and what you said about the water and what the landscape makes so beautiful. It's also our biggest challenge. We have 12,000 Dutchies visiting New Zealand every year, and there are always a few percentage that think they can camp in a dry river. Although it's a big sign, there's a rain shower overnight, and we know there will be some calls from that specific region. Might burn really fast. Fantastic. So, but thank you also for your work in New Zealand itself. It's really proud when you just travel around and you hear the stories, and there's always some Dutchie involved in Wellington. You have a beautiful harbour with a new seawall. That's actually also with dual use. There will also be a bike path, a cycle path on top of it, but it is made with almost 7,000 X blocks. The same stones they use in the Afsluitdijk in the Netherlands, and together with a company in the Netherlands, they really delivered a beautiful seawall that makes the harbor really safe, but also is a little bit of Dutch pride, I would say, almost. But that being said, thank you so much, and thank you for your work, and hope to stay in contact. I would like to thank all of you, because I might be called ambassador, but you are all ambassadors. Might be Dutch, Kiwis, or New Zealanders. But you are in charge of that relationship. So if you have ideas what we can do better or do something that we can improve, please let us know. Make us proud, make both countries proud, because I really think there are a lot of us and we really make that difference. Lastly, also I would like to introduce one of my colleagues who's over from Australia, but he's also responsible for New Zealand, and he's the custom attaché. So any questions about custom affairs? Ask me, Arno. So
I'm leaving now. I can.
yeah. Said lastly, I would like to thank the Dutch Business Association. Thank you for your work, Martijn. Where all of you, where Agnes, they're all in the back, and Patricia there as well. But you're all sitting in the back so far away. So well, thank you, and thank you for organizing this in Dutch Week. So this is not the only event in Dutch Week. We do have a beautiful market, Vrijmarkt, in Holland House. Oh, that's from what time? Is that today?
10 o'clock.
Cedric, thank you also for what you do for the community in the Holland House every month, organizing these events. There's also the King's Day party. Jordi, it's sold out.
It's sold out.
There a waiting list?
There's a waiting list.
Who's going? Oh, there we go. There we go. There's a bike ride on Sunday. Who's going to the bike ride? We still have some place. Oh, there we go. So you have a bike ride. There are still. I will join the bike. Don't worry. There are 11 bike rides. There are 3 King's Day parties. There are 2 business events. Really, again, a successful Dutch Hall. We're still in it. There's Dutch orange lighting all over the country from the south to the north, which is really beautiful in some of the cities. And lastly, I also invite you, what I think is really important, is the 4th time that I will go there, is the memorial, the commemoration of the 3rd of May in Penrose Park. It starts at 2 o'clock, I think, and it's like our dodenherdenking, and I think it's always beautiful to sit in that park and remember why we can live in freedom and what the ultimate sacrifice actually meant for those that are actually engraved on the plaque. So please feel welcome, and I think I'm always proud of the big community that turns up. So that being said, anything else?
Can I say one thing?
Yes.
I would love to get the movies back for Dutch speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like I think fun.
Love that question. It's a film festivals is a lot of work. Yes. So yes, definitely we have funding. We mostly work with Dock Edge. We're Dutch after all, with the funding, we let others sort of organize themselves because we don't have the capacity to do so. So great question. So if you are interested to organize a film festival, because that's the great thing about the community is, these are all volunteers. The whole Dutch Week has nothing to do with the Dutch Embassy. We just map it and we support it, but it is actually all implemented by all of you and those all around New Zealand, and that makes me really proud. I'm really proud ambassador. So thank you so much. The Heineken is over there. I hope.
So thank you all for coming, and please enjoy the snacks and drinks. Just so you know as well, the welcome drink was on the house. After that, there's fresh wine.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Sorry.
So much. I'm not Dutch, but I'm. So Martijn, I know Martijn was very good. I just, but also I teach presentation skills. That's what I do for my business. I'm an expert in that in media training, and you both presented so well. And I learned so much.
Oh, I'm glad you said that.
And there are lots.
Here's your
Oh, thank you.
And an applause.
That's gone.
Oh, I think that was just later on, but I mean, really appreciate it. But so honestly, I learned so much.
Yeah,
And I
I'm
love
glad, yeah.
a couple of things. I love what you said about, Hawke's Bay. It's so beautiful.
Yeah.
But then you said this is a problem.
Yeah.
But also because I've been to so many of the islands, and in
Oh,
my
yeah.
family I have Tongan and Samoan,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm very close to Pacific. But I've got